As our story begins, the City and Suburban Bank of London takes delivery of a shipment of armored wooden crates from the protection of a well-guarded carriage. All things in order, a bank associate signs the manifest, acknowledging receipt of the goods. But as the carriage departs, an envelope falls to the ground, intentionally dropped by the driver. An envelope which is promptly retrieved by his confederate. Later, the confederate delivers the missive into the villainous hands of his employer, who reveals it to be a confidential document from the Bank of France. The commission of a dastardly crime has begun. And so begins the adventure of the Red-Headed League. In the winter 1992 issue of The Armchair Detective, Michael Cox and Jeremy Brett tried to shed some light on their occasional decision to deviate from the canonic texts. Cox proffered the following. In most cases, I think we've been pretty faithful to the stories, but the fact remains that we did depart from the text at times. We added things or changed things. I hope that we've never done anything which went against the spirit of what Conan Doyle wrote, but there's often a difference between what works on the page and what works in a dramatic medium. To which Jeremy Brett added, "We have put little bits into one story and taken little bits from another, but the ones that really work are very, very powerful, cinematic stories. But then you get some that are not so cinematic. They're interesting, but they're different. I would never have believed that the Red-Headed League would be a cinematic success, but it was." Jeremy Brett later admitted to enjoying the filming of the Red-Headed League immensely. To David Stewart Davies, he confided, "It is just so joyously comic. This mean, pompous chap with ginger hair, the bizarre ritual of copying up the encyclopedia, and then the bank robbery. Well, it has all the elements of a Ben Travers farce. Conan Doyle could be a very comic writer." At 221B Baker Street, a sweaty and rotund red-headed man waits, as Sherlock Holmes giggles, silently reading a copy of the Evening Standard. Suddenly, Watson enters, unaware that his friend is in consultation with a client.
Sorry, Holmes.
No! You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, I was afraid you were engaged.
I am, very much so. Dr. Watson shares my love of all that is bizarre and outside the routine of everyday existence. It is at present impossible for me to say whether this case is an instance of crime or no. But suffice it to say that I know as little about Mr. Jabez Wilson as you do yourself, beyond the obvious facts. That he has done manual labor at some time, that he takes snuff, that he has been to China, and that he has done a considerable amount of writing lately.
How in the name of good fortune did you know all that, Mr. Holmes? True as gospel, I once did manual labour. I started off as a ship's carpenter.
Your hands, my good sir. The muscles of your right hand are more developed than the left.
And the writing?
What else could be indicated by the right cuff so very shiny for 5 inches?
And the left sleeve with the smooth patch near the elbow where you lean it on the desk. But China?
The fish, tattooed immediately above his right wrist. I have made a small study of tattoo marks, Mr. Wilson, and have even contributed to the literature of the subject. That trick of staining the fish scales a delicate pink is quite peculiar to China. When, in addition, I see a Chinese coin hanging from his watch chain, the matter becomes even more simple.
I never. I thought at first it was something clever, but now I see there's nothing in it after all.
Now, I begin to think that my reputation, such as it is, will suffer shipwreck if I'm so candid. Omne ignotum pro magnifico.
Stephen Doyle of the Sherlock Holmes Review once asked Jeremy Brett, "How much of your Holmes is what you believe Sherlock Holmes to be, and how much is you?" To which Mr. Brett replied, "Well, the brain isn't me because I'm brainless. The dashing about is rather me. I mean, I loved in the Red-Headed League when I was allowed to jump the sofa. My son rang me after that and said, 'Dad, you're obviously feeling better.' The way to get that speed of the brain is either through stillness or through surprising speed of movement. This helps show the brilliance of the man. That's the hardest thing to get over, that extraordinary brain." Introductions aside, Mr. Wilson bids Watson to read a newspaper, dated the 27th of April, 2 months prior. In it, he finds a curious advertisement announcing a vacancy in an organization known as the Red-Headed League. The vacancy, open to application by any and all red-headed men, would entitle one lucky applicant to £4 a week for purely nominal labor. The only requirement for consideration being the color of the candidate's hair. Watson finds the advert dubious. Holmes laughs aloud, but he invites Mr. Wilson to tell his story in full.
Oh, well, gentlemen, I have a small pawnbroking business in Saxe-Coburg Street, near the city. It's not a very large affair, it just gives me a living. I used to keep 2 assistants, but now I just keep the one. And to tell you the truth, I'd have a job to make it pay, but that he's willing to come at half wages so as to learn the business. About 2 months ago...
What is the name of this obliging youth?
Vincent. Vincent Spaulding. Oh, he's not such a youth either, Mr. Holmes. It's difficult to say his age, but I couldn't wish for a smarter assistant.
You seem most remarkably fortunate in having an employee who comes under the market price. I don't know that your assistant is not as remarkable as your advertisement.
Oh, but he does have his faults. And never was there such a fellow for photography, always snapping away with his camera when he should be improving his mind, and then diving down into the cellar to develop the wretched thing. Still, on the whole, he's a good worker and no vice in him. It was he who first showed me the advertisement.
Mr. Wilson explains that after some cajoling, he was eventually convinced to apply, and with the help of Mr. Spaulding, they made their way to Pope's Court on the date in question. In his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox reflected back on the impressive Pope's Court segment of the episode. He wrote, "The sequence in which Wilson applies for a vacancy in the League is directed by John Bruce with considerable flair. We are told that Fleet Street was choked with red-headed folk, and Pope's Court looked like a coster's orange barrow, which is not an image easy to achieve. In 1920, the Stoll Film Company advertised in the Times for red-headed men sound in mind and body who have served in the HM forces to appear for one day in the Ellie Norwood version." This story is told in Richard Lancelyn Green's notes to the 1993 Oxford edition of The Adventures, although he does not explain why the military background mattered, or indeed the hair color, since that film was shot in black and white. In our case, we genuinely needed redheads, natural, dyed, or wigged, but trade union regulations prevented us from simply plucking them off the street. As far as I remember, John was allowed a crowd of only 50, but he deployed them so adroitly from shot to shot that Conan Doyle's scene is splendidly realized. Finally making their way through a sea of red-headed applicants, Mr. Wilson found himself in the office of one Mr. Duncan Ross, the petitioner, where he was warmly received.
Admirably suited. every requirement. Very fine. Congratulations, Mr. Wilson. It would be injustice to hesitate. You will, I'm sure, excuse me if I take an obvious precaution.
Ross grabs Mr. Wilson's hair with both hands and yanks.
Tears in your eyes. I perceive all is as it should be. We have to be careful. Twice deceived by wigs, once by paint. I could tell you tales of cobbler's wax that would disgust you with human nature. My name is Duncan Ross. I am myself a pensioner upon the fund left by a noble benefactor. Ah! I see you're about to question me about Mr. Ezekiah Hopkins. He was himself red-headed. In his youth he left London for America, where he made many millions of dollars. On his death, it was found, he had instructed the trustees in his will to make life a little easier for the red-headed men in the town of his birth. Wonderful colouring.
The dubious Mr. Duncan Ross is played here by Scottish actor Richard Wilson. Wilson is indelibly known for playing cranky ex-security guard Victor Meldrew in the award-winning BBC sitcom One Foot in the Grave. But he is equally well respected in the theater world, having helmed numerous plays, including 2000's Mr. Culpert, for which he won the TMA Award for Best Director. And while Wilson started off young as a laboratory assistant at the Stob Hill Hospital in Glasgow, at the age of 27, he heard his true calling and left his scientific career behind to pursue the life of an actor. In the ensuing years, he would inhabit countless memorable roles in everything from Merlin to Doctor Who. But to me, he will always be Mr. Duncan Ross of the Red-Headed League. Ross goes on to explain that starting immediately, Mr. Wilson's duties would consist of staying in the office each day from 10 until 2 and copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica. Wilson was skeptical of the offer, but in spite of his doubts, the following Monday, he reported to his new employer and was pleased to find everything in order. And for the next 8 weeks, he thoroughly dealt with all topics of scholarship pertaining to the letter A.
Abacus, abbey, architecture, Acts of the Apostles, adulteration, anatomy, apes, aqueducts.
But just as he was about to begin work on the letter B, he arrived at his job to find a note tacked to the door, stating that the League had been dissolved. Befuddled, Mr. Wilson inquired with the landlord, and, receiving a forwarding address, immediately made his way to 17 King Edward Street, only to find the address that of Burkitt & Son, manufacturers of artificial kneecaps. Holmes and Watson are unable to contain their reactions.
I don't see there's anything very funny about it. If all you can do is laugh at me, well, I can go elsewhere.
No, Mr. Wilson, please sit down. I wouldn't miss this case for the world. It is most refreshingly unusual.
I was so incensed at the fraudulent deceit that I came straight to you, sir. Having heard of your great reputation for helping poor people in distress.
Oh, Mr. Wilson, forgive me.
You know, Mr. Wilson, I really don't think that you've got any great grievance against this extraordinary league. On the contrary, you've been very well paid, to say nothing of the Detailed knowledge which you've acquired on every subject under the letter A.
Yes, but what's the object of them playing this prank on me? That's what I want to know.
Holmes asks Mr. Wilson to describe his assistant, Vincent Spaulding. When Wilson mentions that the man has pierced ears and a white splash of acid upon his forehead, Holmes' demeanor deepens. Agreeing to take the case, he assures Mr. Wilson not to worry about his fee, believing it will be paid by another. Mr. Jabez Wilson is portrayed here by the affable Roger Hammond, and according to Peter Haining in the television Sherlock Holmes, although fair-haired and tinged with red, Hammond required what he referred to as a wonderful wig and some cheerfully helpful period clothes. The story also provided him a reunion with Jeremy Brett, for he had been an assistant stage manager and actor at the Manchester Library Theatre when Jeremy was first there as a juvenile lead. But who was Roger Hammond? Let's take just a moment to find out. Born in Stockport, Lancashire, as a child, Hammond struggled with a crippling stammer, but he found that the best way to overcome it was to pretend to be someone else. He later attended Bryanston School, then Emmanuel College, where he studied to be an archaeologist, but put most of his energy into local plays. It was at Emmanuel that he joined the Marlowe Society, a theater club for Cambridge students, where he soon found himself at the center of an enthusiastic group of young performers, which included Ian McKellen, Derek Jacobi, Trevor Nunn, and Miriam Margolyes. It wasn't long before he decided to leave archaeology behind and devote himself to acting. In 1964, Hammond made his television debut in an episode of The Villains, and his first film appearance the next year opposite Michael Gough and Tony Robbins. But Hammond was also a natural with children, and his London debut was at the Unicorn Theatre Club in 1963, a theater which specialized in pantomime and plays for young audiences, where Hammond became an overnight favorite. He also regularly appeared on the BBC Radio Children's Hour. He spent most of the 1970s and 80s on the small screen, where he became a familiar face in The Avengers, The Oneida Line, The Sweeney, Emmerdale, Doctor Who, and countless other television dramas. He would even eventually reunite with his Granada series co-star Richard Wilson in an episode of One Foot in the Grave, where the two share a waiting room bench at the optometrist, and hilarity ensues.
They reckon he's got to have a tube put in now, you know.
Oh, God.
How big are those tubes?
Oh, quite big.
Oh, about this long, some of them. Get away. And they just push them right in, you know. They say it's like sliding a straw into a bottle of Coca-Cola.
Good God above.
Were you there that day his carbuncle broke in Queensway's bedding centre?
Right, that's it. That's enough for me, I'm afraid. Carbuncles, kidneys, tubes, his inside must look like a map of the Metropolitan line.
But in the 90s, Hammond began to add movie roles into the mix, and he appeared in several memorable films over the next 2 decades, including The Madness of King George, Richard III, Around the World in 80 Days, and The Good Woman. In 2010, having completely defeated his own childhood stammer, he gave his final, irony-laden performance as the doctor who fails to cure the king of that very same impediment in the Academy Award-winning picture, The King's Speech. Writing in The Guardian, his friend and fellow actor, Sir Ian McKellen, paid tribute to him. Roger Hammond's special achievement as an actor was to spread great good humor and jollity among his colleagues, always optimistic and fun. He invariably became the comforting center of a company's offstage life. In a who's who of theater, his name might not be prominent, but among his myriad colleagues and friends, he was an ever-twinkling star. Roger Hammond died from cancer on November 8, 2012, at the age of 76. As Watson shows Mr. Wilson out, Holmes lights a pipe.
What do you make of it all, Watson?
I make nothing of it. It's the most mysterious business.
And yet there are graver issues hanging from this affair than at first sight appear.
What are you going to do?
To smoke. It is quite a three-pipe problem, and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes.
This moment when Jeremy Brett curls himself up in his chair, with his knees drawn up and his black clay pipe thrusting out like the bill of some strange bird, is a fantastic reproduction of one of Sidney Paget's most iconic illustrations. To Elizabeth Tremblay of the Armchair Detective magazine, Michael Cox explained, "We went as far as to have those drawings on the set with us when we were filming, and tried actually to reproduce the same actions and relationships in the characters that the illustrations showed. It was certainly an enthusiasm of mine, because I first read the stories in old copies of the Strand magazine, which had belonged to my father, so I always associate those drawings with the stories. Of course, we backed it up with research into the costumes, the social habits, and the appearance of London and other places at the time. So we supplemented one artist's imagery with real-life documentation, as well as we could." To Rosemary Herbert, Jeremy Brett discussed the distinctive costuming requirements necessary to replicate those famous illustrations. He said, "That came about slowly. I said to Esther Dean, our brilliant designer, 'Can we start doing the Paget drawings in terms of costuming?' She couldn't see why not. The drawings are very detailed, but because I'm very big, and I'm not really the right skeleton for the drawings, I had to have clothing designed especially. Take that very thin dust coat. I'm afraid it's like that for one very good reason, that it was the hottest summer in 1983 that England had probably ever had, and I die of the heat in any case. So I took my waistcoat off, and I had my shirt cut into a little dicky shape and wore that long, thin dust coat. I was cooler, and this also gave me the long, thin line." Elsewhere in London, a gray-haired Duncan Ross, aka William Morris, delivers a report to his master that the business of the Red-Headed League is concluded, and most satisfactorily. The professor smiles and pats him gently on the shoulder before moving his attention back to a map of the city of Paris. At Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes finishes his third pipe and wakes Watson from a catnap. Together, they make their way to Saxe-Coburg Street, where, after thumping the sidewalk with his stick, Holmes inquires with Wilson's assistant, Mr. Spaulding, about the location of the Strand. Taking his advice, they quickly turn the corner.
Holmes? Holmes, I could have told you that.
No doubt, Watson.
What is it? And why did you beat the pavement with your stick?
Watson, we are spies in an enemy's territory.
Once Spaulding departs, Holmes and Watson stealthily emerge, and in a quiet alcove in the center of the square, Holmes reveals the plot of the mystery.
A considerable crime is in contemplation. Today, being Saturday, somewhat complicates matters. But now, Doctor, our work is done. It is time we had some play. Sarasate is playing at the St. James's Hall this afternoon.
A sandwich and a cup of coffee?
And then off to Violin Land, where all is sweetness, delicacy, and harmony.
And no red-headed clients to vex us with their conundrums.
As Sarasate plays, Holmes listens, eyes closed, enthralled by the music.
All the afternoon, he sat in the stalls, wrapped in the most perfect happiness, while his gently smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes were as unlike those of Holmes the sleuth-hound as it was possible to conceive. When I saw him, so enwrapped in the music, I felt that an evil time might be coming upon those whom he had set himself to hunt down.
Elsewhere, the mysterious professor continues to make his plans as he examines a map of Saxe-Coburg Square, including the City and Suburban Bank. Later, at Baker Street, Holmes and Watson are joined by Inspector Jones and Mr. Merriweather, director of the bank, who is not convinced of the prudence of their task.
But I do say, as I've said before, the Coburg branch of the bank is as well secured as any building in London. There is no possibility that it could be broken into. Even the insurance assessors agree on that point.
And you, sir, should know, being not only the resident manager, but also the director.
I should know, and I do know. And what is more, this is the first time for 27 years that I've missed my Saturday night of whist at my club.
Oh, dear.
And I find myself extremely inconvenienced.
I think that you will find the game tonight much more exciting, and the stake will be for many, many thousands of pounds.
And what will my reward be, Mr. Holmes?
A young man called Clay.
John Clay? Oh, how I'd like to get my hands on that devil.
You shall.
This young fella's a gentleman, as Mr. Holmes says, but he's turned against his class. He's as cunning as the devil, slippery as an eel, and he's turned crib-cracking and forgery into a fine art.
His grandfather was a royal duke, and he himself was educated at Eton and Oxford. So, Watson, bring the gun.
Sherlockians and superfans of the Granada series might notice something off about this scene, as Michael Cox pointed out in his book. He wrote, "Here, we made a mistake, which is repeated in the end credits, and I wonder how many viewers have noticed it. Holmes refers to Inspector Jones as Athelney Jones, the inspector who was involved in the Sign of Four, whereas this is Peter Jones, and presumably a totally different fellow. We cast John Lebanowski as Jones in The League, but when we eventually filmed The Sign of Four 2 years later, and having discovered our mistake, we made amends by casting a different and more distinctly Welsh actor. This was in line with our aim to distinguish clearly between the various policemen who appear in the canon and a parallel effort to maintain continuity of casting when a character appears more than once." But whether Cox and Hawksworth were justified in their worries is not altogether clear. In the book, A Sherlock Holmes Commentary, scholar Martin Dakin makes the case that the ado may be about nothing at all. He writes, "In spite of the hints of nepotism dropped by some commentators, there can be no doubt that Peter Jones is the same as Athelney Jones of the Sign. The description of his person and characteristics, not to speak of his reference to their collaboration in the Sholto murder, place this beyond question. Why Watson calls him by one name in one story and by the other in the other is impossible to determine." Arriving at the bank, Mr. Merriweather admits them into the dark corridors below the building. Upon entering the vault, Holmes orders Merriweather not to interfere as he examines the inside of the dark cellar.
There is no way in which a thief could break into this bank.
Is it a special reason why a thief should want to break into this bank?
Nothing particularly...
Something in the past few months? Something that you have concealed from her?
The information I have is confidential, known only to the directors of the bank. It is not to be divulged to members of the public. Not even amateur detectives.
Private consulting detective, Mr. Merriweather. Unique in the annals of crime, I believe. Isn't that so, Inspector?
Yes, Doctor. I advise you to cooperate with Mr. Holmes.
Especially as at this moment I am trying to save your skin and that of your fellow directors. So what is it?
Our French gold. We had occasion some months ago to strengthen our resources and borrowed for that purpose 60,000 Napoleons from the Bank of France. Therefore, our reserve of bullion is much larger than is usual in such a branch of the bank.
Where is this gold?
The crates upon which Dr. Watson sits contain 30,000 Napoleons wrapped between layers of lead foil.
May we see it?
Opening the crate, they behold a fortune in golden coins, all bearing the visage of the French emperor. Holmes places his ear to the wall, where he hears the first sounds of the encroaching thieves. As the hours pass, they wait for the criminals to emerge.
This is much bolder and larger in conception than I had at first thought. Wouldn't you say, John?
I would indeed. This Clay's more of an amateur adventurer or spur-of-the-moment criminal. This long planning is not Clay's style at all, sir. Not at all.
Unless it's a pawn. A much larger game. Mr. Merriweather, someone has had access to information of the most confidential sort. Careful plans have been laid. A mastermind has been at work.
Are you suggesting that...
I'm suggesting that it bears all the hallmarks of Professor Moriarty's work.
Moriarty?
And who is this Moriarty?
We don't really know, sir. Well, that is, neither the police nor, I think, Mr. Sherlock Holmes here have ever set eyes on him. Yet his name echoes and re-echoes throughout the underworld.
It appears that he is a man of good birth and excellent education. But he has hereditary tendencies of the most diabolical kind. A criminal strain runs in his blood, which is increased and rendered infinitely more dangerous by his extraordinary mental powers. He is the organizer of half that is evil and nearly all that is undetected in this great city. He is never caught. His agent is caught, but the central power is never caught. Seldom even suspected. We shall not see the professor tonight.
Michael Cox once remarked, "I have always thought that only two eminent Victorians could have dreamed up the Red-Headed League. One was Conan Doyle, and the other was James Moriarty." According to David Stewart Davies, it had always been Michael Cox's plan to use Moriarty in this story, partly because Michael thought, as do many Sherlockians, that the Napoleon of crime is too fascinating a character to be relegated to an appearance in one story only. Also, Cox and John Hawksworth thought that it would be more effective to introduce Holmes's nemesis in an earlier episode so that the dramatic events of the final problem could be seen in a more detailed context. The modern viewer is perhaps more questioning than a reader of The Strand, who, in 1893, accepted without question the presence of this evil mastermind who not only controlled a great criminal organization, but was out to kill Sherlock Holmes. If he was so important and dangerous, why had we not heard of him before? In reality, Conan Doyle was in a headlong rush to kill off his detective, and these concerns did not bother him a jot. But to a modern audience, which has had time to get used to the idea that Holmes dies, revives, and returns, it all seems somewhat implausible. Granada attempted to rectify this, by at least showing Moriarty at work before the Reichenbach business. Granada's greatest detective author, Keith Frankel, echoed these sentiments, speaking highly of the series' restraint in revealing the great detective's arch-rival. He wrote, "The Moriarty element has, of course, continued to captivate both film and television adapters and audiences alike since the character's inception in 1893, holding them in a kind of thrall that Doyle himself neither experienced nor intended. Almost every episodic translation of the corpus, be it the 14 black and white features starring Basil Rathbone, or the television reworkings made by the Len Film Studios in the late 70s and early 80s, seized the opportunity to exploit the obvious dramatic potential afforded by integrating Holmes's dark ringer into the mix. Despite making only a single on-stage appearance in the final problem, the professor's notoriety sweeps the whole of the canonical gamut. His absence, therefore, throughout the preceding 11 entries, has felt distinctly conspicuous. Not only is he never referred to on screen, but his very existence is never even acknowledged. You have to admire Granada's resolve, because by keeping Moriarty in reserve for so long, even the most cursory reference to him induces an electrifying frisson. Such is the infamy of the part that he plays in Holmesian lore that even the uninitiated are versed enough to know that there can be only one outcome to this particular contest, and that Holmes is in mortal danger. As the intruder's tunnel approaches the vault floor, Holmes entreats his companions to douse their lights and wait silently in the darkness. Suddenly, the blackness is pierced by a ray of light from the broken floor as a pale hand feels its way above. Within moments, Vincent Spaulding, aka John Clay, rises from the hole. But before his partner can emerge, Holmes shines his light upon them, and they scurry like rats.
Great Scott! Jump, Archie, jump!
Archie flees back down the tunnel. Clay draws his weapon, but Holmes disarms him with a strike of his hunting crop.
It's no good, John Clay. You have no chance at all.
So I see. Though I fancy my pal is all right.
At this moment, he is running into the welcoming arms of the police.
You seem to have done the thing very completely. I must compliment you.
And are you? I'm Sherlock Holmes, a private investigator.
I didn't for a moment suspect you of being a policeman, Mr. Holmes.
Come on, hold out while I fit the derbies.
I beg you to take your filthy hands off me. You may not be aware that I have royal blood in my veins. And be so kind as to say sir and please when you address me.
All right. Would you please, sir, mind marching upstairs where we'll get a cab to transport your highness to the police station?
That's better. Gentlemen.
Oh, one question, Mr. Clay. Am I right in thinking that Professor Moriarty was somewhere behind the idea of the Red-Headed League?
I suggest you keep that name off your lips, Mr. Holmes, if you value your future well-being.
Referred to by Holmes as the fourth, or perhaps even the third, most intelligent man in London, John Clay is portrayed here by the always engaging Tim McInerney. After studying English at Wadham College, Oxford, McInerney got his first big break in the Blackadder series for BBC One in 1983. And while he is almost certainly best known for his portrayals of Lord Percy and Captain Darling in that program, his body of dramatic work is actually far more prolific. Having appeared in over 100 shows and films, from Marple to Midsummer Murders to Richard III, where he was reunited with his Red-Headed League co-star Roger Hammond, McInerney has always been firmly planted in drama. And in 2016, he joined the cast of the hugely popular Game of Thrones in the role of Lord Robert Glover of Deepwood Motte. The Red-Headed League was actually one of his very first dramatic roles, but it is not his only connection to the great detective. In 2005, he played the role of Selden in The Strange Case of Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle, which sought to dramatize how Conan Doyle originally dreamed up his fictional detective. He also appeared as the Lestrade-like inspector, Horace Mering, in the ITV miniseries Houdini and Doyle, a show which paired the legendary author with the equally legendary magician as they teamed up to help Scotland Yard solve a series of inexplicable cases. Also in 2016, he appeared in the Mark Gatiss Stephen Moffat series, Sherlock. In particular, he played Sir Eustace Carmichael in the Christmassy period special episode, The Abominable Bride, an episode which features a distinct nod to the Granada series. When asked which of his projects he remembered most fondly, he remarked that it was likely Notting Hill, a romantic comedy in which he played Hugh Grant's best friend. Not only did the film enjoy a close-knit, family-like atmosphere on set, but during the film's climax, Tim's character drives at breakneck speeds through the streets of London, with Hugh Grant in the back seat. He said, "I actually did the driving, and the screaming in the car is real, because everyone was terrified." After it was done, the film's lead stuntman came over and told me to give him a call if the acting didn't pan out. Happily, however, it's panned out just fine, and at the age of 63, McInerney shows no signs of slowing down. The rest of the cast is rounded out with fantastic performances from Doug Lebanowski as Athelney Jones, John Woodnutt as Mr. Merriweather, and of course, Eric Porter as Professor Moriarty. And we will certainly spend some time getting to know Mr. Porter a little better, but I think we'll save that for the next installment. For now, let's return to our story. After Clay's compatriot is apprehended by Scotland Yard's finest, Duncan Ross reports the details of their failure to an incensed Professor Moriarty.
It won't do, you know. It won't do.
No, Professor. I'm sorry we failed you. Sherlock Holmes.
Holmes is a mere amateur in the field of detection. Still, he seems a clever man. Or a lucky one. And he has a positive talent getting in my way.
Should he be removed?
It may be necessary. It would be disappointing. I find him interesting. I believe this is the third time he has incommoded me. If this continues, then certainly something will have to be done to encourage Mr. Holmes either to withdraw or stand clear.
Back at Baker Street, Holmes and Watson do some shopping as they reflect on their victory.
Holmes, I trust I am not more dense than my neighbours, and yet here I have seen what you have seen, heard what you have heard, and yet you have seen clearly not only what had happened, but what was about to happen, while to me the whole business was still confused and grotesque.
Mr. Watson, recollect. When I heard that the assistant had come for half wages, it was obvious that he had some motive for securing the situation.
Yes, but how did you know what his motive was?
Had there been a woman in the house, I would have suspected immediately some vulgar intrigue. But when I heard from Mr. Wilson about the acid stain and the pierced ears, I knew that Vincent Spaulding and John Clay were the same person. But why was Clay there?
The photography gave you the clue.
Exactly. The cellar. He was working on something in the cellar. Something which took many hours a day. For 2 months on end, he was tunneling. But where to? When I tapped my stick on the pavement in the street that day, I was ascertaining whether the tunnel stretched in front or behind the building. It was in front, towards the bank. I recognized Clay immediately and delayed him to have time to examine his knees. They spoke clearly of many hours of tunneling, no doubt linking up with the maze of sewers beneath Saxe-Coburg Square. When they closed the Red-Headed League offices, it was a sign they no longer cared about Jabez Wilson's presence. In other words, the tunnel was complete.
And that they would make the attempt on the Saturday was just a guess.
Wilson, you disappoint me. I never guess. Saturday is an excellent night for stealing bullion. It gives you a full day to escape.
Oh, you've reasoned it out beautifully, Holmes. It's so long a chain, and yet every link rings true.
It saved me from ennui. You know, sometimes I think that my whole life is spent in one long effort to escape from the commonplaces of existence.
No. You are a benefactor of the race, Holmes.
Well, maybe it is of some little use after all. L'homme c'est rien, l'œuvre c'est tout, as Gustave Flaubert wrote to George Sand.
As they arrive at 221B, an angry face watches from the shadows. Moriarty glowers as Holmes disappears inside. The professor has met his archenemy, and he contemplates his revenge. Original air date on the ITV network was September 22nd, 1985, at 9:45 p.m. Dramatized by John Hawksworth and directed by John Bruce. Now, we obviously know Mr. John Hawksworth quite well as one of the co-creators of the Granada series, but this entry represents his first credit as a dramatist, and it couldn't have been implemented any finer. Mr. Hawksworth's pen will grace the series again in the next episode, The Final Problem, along with numerous other offerings as the series progresses. We've also met director John Bruce on The Dancing Men and The Speckled Band, and we will see him again on The Second Stain. But it's time to look at this one under the lens. So let's grab our penny bottles of ink, our pens, and a few sheets of foolscap paper as we join Luke for a 3-pipe smoke from the comfort of the armchairs. Jabez Wilson, a redhead, grew needier, so he copied the encyclopedia, more for money than fun, till a tunnel is done. Crooks worked quickly, but Sherlock was speedier. Isaac Asimov, from his book, Asimov's Sherlockian Limericks.
Should it have been encyclopedia?
I think it probably should have been, but I wasn't willing to throw my accent that far. Well, we're back. It's been a bit of a hiatus, well, for us anyway. I mean, we recorded the last one before the pandemic struck, and then, well, everything changed, so it took us a while to get it out, and then we had to put this one together. So it's just been a while since we talked about Sherlock, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
That being said, we are recording remotely on this one for the first time ever, so we'll see how that goes. You might hear an occasional airplane or a Harley Davidson outside, but we'll see.
Actually, we're just going back to our meager roots because the first episode was recorded like this.
You mean at our house?
Yeah.
That's true, but we were in the same room. This is the first time we've ever been not in the same room. So
that's true.
We'll see if the show suffers terribly.
See if it even works.
Well, let's just jump in at the beginning. What's your first note that you wrote down?
My first note is there's just so much good in this episode that if we were doing like DVD commentary for this, we would be needing to pause the episode so often just to discuss all the great details.
What's hilarious about that is my first note was very similar, but I moved that note to the very end because I thought it was a great closer.
Well, you can still close with it.
That's true. I mean, but basically what I said was that it was like, I feel like the show in a way hits its stride. It just feels it feels seamless. It feels effortless almost for them, like they're just cranking them out now and they're just great, which the bittersweet part of that is obviously David Burke is only here for one more episode. So,
right.
But yeah, but even like David Burke, he's just so wonderful in this. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but
Yeah.
My first note, other than that, is Moriarty's fingernails.
That was my second note.
I wish I knew if they had him grow those out on purpose for the role or not. I couldn't find an answer to that in the book, but I mean, you'd think it's like an obvious thing, but it's such a great touch, and it's just like pure evil, It's so good.
Yeah, I did wonder about that, but I also, Jeremy, I noticed his fingernails in this episode as well.
Really?
He had very nice but long fingernails.
Maybe it's a
gentlemanly thing.
Gentleman thing, yeah. I also love Moriarty's room, like the skull on the mantle in the background. I don't know if you noticed; it's pretty obvious there. But I looked it up, and it was filmed at Chetham's Library in Manchester, and it's used even more extensively in the next episode. Obviously, they shot basically all of Moriarty's scenes at the same time and place. So, but yeah, if we ever make it to Manchester, there's quite a few places we'll need to visit. But I would like to make that library one of them.
Yeah. Well, my second note is Sherlock jumping over the settee to open the door for Watson.
Oh, yeah.
It's just one of those things that, like, the similarities and the differences from the book. But in the book, it just says, Holmes pulled me abruptly into the room.
Yeah.
And I kind of just thought it was a neat interpretation of that line, to leap over a couch and pull him in.
Yeah. Well, and Watson's face there is kind of one of my good notes, too, because I just love the way he looks when he walks in. He's like, oh, sorry, Holmes.
Yeah.
His such a big face, and it sells it so well. And I feel like I'm part of all the message boards and all the Facebook groups and all that for the show. And people are always, somebody new is always debating who's the best Watson. And I feel like that little moment kind of sums up whether you're going to like David Burke or Edward Hardwicke more.
Yeah.
Because there's kind of a youthful exuberance to David Burke that Edward Hardwicke just doesn't have, which isn't a bad thing. It's just different.
Yeah. Well, I would argue it's a little bit of that classic bumbling Watson, but just not too much. Like
Right.
never too much.
Right, exactly.
Whereas Hardwicke doesn't, you don't quite get that.
Yeah, Hardwicke plays it totally straight, 100% straight. But maybe in a way, that's another reason why the show is just so great, is because, the world was used to the bumbling Watson for so long that David Burke had to ease us in to a newer incarnation of him. But I don't know. I love him in this.
Yeah.
One note I wrote down was, I don't want to jump ahead to the books too much, but if you look at the paper that Holmes is reading, he is reading the Evening Standard. But in the book, he's reading the Morning Chronicle. Did you read about this?
No. Well, I read something about this.
Yeah, I don't know if there was a note in one of your books, but Klinger, in his book, mentioned that the Morning Chronicle actually went bankrupt in 1860, so he would not have been reading the Morning Chronicle because it wouldn't have been in existence at that time. So they adjusted that for the show, which is kind of cool, I guess. I mean, you could argue that either way, I suppose, but at least it's more historically accurate.
Right. Yeah, that's a good touch.
Yeah.
In the Baring Gould book, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about dates and newspaper clippings, and I kind of started going through them, going, all right, I'll give you this one and go with it, and then I gave up.
Yeah. There's a lot of Jeremy Brett laughter in this one.
Yeah.
I can't say it's all my favorite Jeremy Brett laughter because some of it feels maybe ADR, hard to say.
Yeah, well, the one where he covers his face.
Yeah.
Which is weird and one of my favorites because it is weird. It's on a cut.
Yeah.
So I think one of them is the real audio, or even one of them is ADR, but they don't match. So maybe that's part of it.
Right.
In case, I mean, should we mention for the uninitiated that ADR is a process in post-production where you re-record your audio in case, dialogue was bad on the day.
Right.
It's a pet peeve of mine, and I think yours too, but some actors just aren't good at ADR.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can watch a movie and think, man, this is a terrible actor.
Right.
And most times, maybe not most, but a lot of times it's actually they're just bad at doing ADR.
Yeah.
They can't match their inflection. They can't match their emotion on the day. So sometimes you get that feeling. And sometimes when it feels wooden and robotic, that's usually the case.
Yeah. Also known as dubbing. But I mean, it's one of those things where, we've been lucky enough to work in that industry a little bit. And until we did, I never knew that was the situation, that 90% of film work is mostly dubbed. And so we've experienced it firsthand where a performance is great on the day and it just gets ruined in the ADR booth. And sometimes it's the actor, sometimes it's the ADR editor. There's a million things that can happen.
Sometimes it's the booth.
Right.
Sometimes, I mean, just being in a dead, sound dampened, controlled booth doesn't sound like you're on Baker Street. So you get this weird quality and, sometimes there's not a lot you can do about it.
Right. And the lesson to be learned there is, for any aspiring filmmakers, is get the best audio on the day that you can.
Yeah.
Because you never know.
Or get a really great ADR engineer.
Right. Well, not to jump ahead to the books too much, but this story actually reads quite comically. It's quite funny the way it's written. I mean, the episode kind of retains those elements, but I feel like they made a choice to play the episode more straight, really, and dry, kind of mining that humor mostly in the reactions by Holmes and Watson to Jabez Wilson and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they could have really easily turned this into a more farcical endeavor. So I mean, I'm again, props to them. I'm glad they didn't. I think it's kind of just the perfect mix. Lighthearted, but still very serious, especially with Moriarty being thrown in.
Which wasn't in the story.
Right, exactly. But even like Duncan Ross, Richard Wilson is like well-known as a comic actor. I never really thought of him that way until I kind of started researching him and watching some of the stuff he's done. And now watching The Red-Headed League, his comic timing is really quite impressive.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't ruin it. He doesn't push it too far. He just gives it just enough to be quirky.
Right. One of my favorite lines, well, maybe not favorite lines, that's maybe going too far, is when he's introducing himself and then he goes, I see you're about to ask a question about Mr. Ezekiah Hopkins or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, of course he was going to ask that question, but it was just an interesting little jump.
Yeah.
And like also not in the story.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that scene there for a minute because that whole scene there, like the moment you just described, again, Jabez Wilson acting, without, he didn't even say the words.
Right.
He just kind of like started to emote and then he was cut off. There's a lot of interaction there.
I feel like Jabez, maybe more than anyone we've seen so far, but when I was watching it this time around, I felt like he was just plucked out of Victorian history and put into the show. Like he didn't never seem like an actor to me. I don't know why that is. I mean, a lot of, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but he just seemed really to inhabit the role.
Yeah.
And it was a weird role, Well,
I haven't seen him in a ton, but I do feel like, I think I made a note somewhere, this is the role he was born to play,
Yeah.
But I like this scene a lot. I don't know on which viewing I wrote it down, but I said, look at all the red in this office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
The encyclopedias, Wilson's waistcoat is red, Ross's necktie is red, The writing on the contract is red. There's just all this red in there.
And not a lot else.
No, the walls are completely bare.
Yeah, it is a good scene, the tears in your eyes.
Yeah.
All those lines. He actually kind of reminds me of Bill Nye a bit.
Yeah.
Especially the last time I watched it. I just thought, like, if we ever need to remake this episode, Bill Nye would be the guy to get.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Duncan Ross's wig?
Yeah.
I guess there's a lot of interesting wig work in the series, but I think his maybe was most actually surprising, because at the end of the episode when you see him without.
Yeah, no, definitely. A very long time went by before I even realized that Richard Wilson was the same guy meeting with Moriarty at the end, because he just looks so different without the red hair.
Yeah.
I could tell you tales of cobbler's wax that would disgust you with human nature, which I don't know if it says it in your books, but I noticed somewhere in I think it was in the Klinger book, it said that cobbler's wax was used by shoemakers to make the thread more supple.
The thread or like the laces?
It says the thread, so I'm assuming thread of the shoe, but because, you're dealing with leather? I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I was, and this is no lie, looking for something to make thread more supple recently within some threaded cotton insulated wire. It's like vintage wire. And I had seen on some of them where they appeared waxy, and I was genuinely wondering where that came from. So maybe it's cobbler's wax.
Yeah. Well, speaking of wigs and red, when he says the vacancy is filled, and then there's the camera goes outside to look at everybody in the hallway.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've noticed it, but there's a guy out there who he seems to have a strange red halo of paint, like painted on his head. But what's funny is I think he's actually a redhead.
Yeah.
So he's got the red paint, and it's just so fake and bad looking. It's definitely comical. But the other great part of it is that if you watch all those shots, like we super fans do, you start to see the same group of people in all those shots, when they're there at Pope's Court. And you see that guy kind of peppered throughout, and he's pretty obvious once you see him for the first time. You can easily pick him out again.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of funny.
No, it's funny. I do wonder, though, with some of that kind of stuff, like that, it would have been a lot of extras to have on hand at that, at that time. But I do wonder if they put an ad out for redheaded extras anyway, and maybe they just only got redheaded people, so they kind of painted the head of the lightest one they got or something, just so they could have the story work.
Yeah, it's possible. Speaking of red things in that scene, though, this is kind of a tangent, but because I'm a rare book collector of sorts, I kind of had to dive deep into the encyclopedia that he is copying. And what's interesting about it is, if you can tell from the spine that it's the 9th edition Encyclopedia Britannica, which was published 1892 to 1894. But this particular edition is fairly special in a way. It's considered the scholar's edition because of the superb quality of the articles and the high caliber of contributors to that particular year of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And some of the people that contributed were Thomas Huxley, Alfred Russel Wallace, James Clerk Maxwell, Robert Louis Stevenson, Amelia Edwards, William Morris. There's like all these people that contributed to that one edition. And it's considered by many to be the high point of scholarship of the encyclopedia. So it's kind of critically acclaimed as one of the most rare copies you can get. And I looked it up actually at the time when I was researching this on eBay. And there was one set that was identical to the one in the episode. And there's numerous ones out there where the binding is a little bit different, but they had one that was exactly the same, and it was $1,935 for the set. So, about $2,000 if anybody really wants to have that prop replica in their house.
Yeah,
I'd buy it if money was growing on trees. But I'm sure it's a pretty great. I'm sure the essays are amazing.
I wonder if that's why they used it, or if it's just because it was red.
Hard to know. I don't think they don't describe which version of the encyclopedia is in the story. I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Well, one tangent of my own, a continuing tangent, which is the closed captions on the BritBox app.
Yeah.
Jabez Wilson became Jay Beard's Wilson in that scene. And Ezekiah Hopkins became Mr. Ethic Gaia Hopkins. Just a fun little thing.
I'm sure that would be a hard one to translate for anybody, really.
Another, I guess, tangent. One of the things I kind of liked, and it's, it sticks out, but the scene where he bumps into the neighbor, when he goes, what happened to Mr. Duncan Ross? And he's like, I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
He says he moved offices to near St. Paul's.
Right.
And then they cut to the alley, and you see St. Paul's Cathedral, and it's clearly just kind of a matte painting or a photograph that's been masked in. It's not great.
Yeah. I was frankly surprised that shot survives as an HD image because, the part of Jabez Wilson walking down the street is in HD.
Yeah.
And so, like we've talked about on the show before, a lot of those shots, a lot of those special effecty moments, crossfades, even little things where they added something to the frame, titles, whatever it may be, those shots don't seem to have translated over into Blu-ray or to the new HD transfers in HD, but this one did. So I guess, you tell me, but I think that probably means it was added to the original print negative, or I don't know. What do you think?
I only have a theory because I don't know that much about the technology back then, but I do know one trick people would do with negatives was they would do double exposures, and so you could mask out or dodge areas when you're developing.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that with the negative as well as you're actually exposing the negative.
Right.
So it's possible they set up the shot and masked out that part of the frame, and then when they were printing, they put the image in. So maybe it's burned into the negative. I'm not sure about that, but it's possible. But it was something I always wondered about with that shot, because I thought, well, they're in England. Why didn't they just go to St. Paul's? But
right.
I guess it's probably because the alleyways don't look right. But then again, they also were in Manchester, which is not close.
True. My biggest critique of it was just that it's just not a very good picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's like, as you've said in the past, the lighting is off, or the coloring or something of St. Paul's just doesn't feel right. I remember watching this on DVD years ago and thinking the same thing. Like, it just looks fake.
Yeah.
Seeing it in HD, it looks really fake. It looks
yeah.
It's just kind of a sore thumb.
It's the kind of thing, they could have changed it, updated it, or just not even updated, but just made it look like a nicer photo. But, they could get the George Lucas attack for changing too much stuff. So maybe it was good that they left it.
Yeah. It has that smack of like a Doctor Who era effect.
Yeah.
Where we're slapping on a background, and maybe they learned from their lesson, because it seems like I don't think they ever do it again in the series. I'm not totally sure.
I don't think so, but I recently watched Dick Tracy, the Warren Beatty version.
Yeah.
And I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that famously is like the last movie that did matte paintings, at least en masse.
Yeah, I watched something about that actually not too long ago, and that was like the Disney matte painting background artists were all involved in that one. And yeah, that was a major matte painting achievement, that movie.
Yeah.
But I think considered by many to be like the crown of matte painting technology.
Yeah.
But it's worth watching just for the backgrounds on that one.
And the watch.
Yeah. So getting back to 221B Baker Street, there's a moment here where, after they're laughing and Jabez Wilson threatens to walk out, everybody calms down. And then Jeremy Brett kind of changes the mood, and he says, "What's he like, this Vincent Spaulding?"
Yeah.
I love Jeremy Brett's delivery here and the way he's just thinking it through. But then when Wilson says that he has a splash of acid on his forehead, Jeremy Brett's mood just completely changes. And what I wrote down when I was making these notes, I wrote down, it's as though a cobra has just revealed itself on the dining room table. And then after I thought about it, and I watched it a couple times, I was like, you know what this is? He almost makes the exact same face as he does in The Speckled Band when he sees the snake for the very first time.
Yeah.
Or the swamp adder or whatever. But it's like, it's just so brilliant the way that his face drops and the entire mood of the scene just changes because we see the danger in his performance, and it's just one of those little moments where I don't think, if you're just watching the show once through or it's your first time seeing it or whatever, you may not notice these little moments and how important they are, but when you see these things over and over again, and you can tell when the mood just changes like that, I just think it's, again, a testament to Jeremy Brett's acting. It's just really, really brilliant.
Yeah, and it's especially brilliant because there's no music cue to correspond with it.
Right.
That was an important piece of information for the plot. Holmes just figured out a piece of it. And normally we get a little doo-doo-doo, you know, there's something to cue the audience, but it's all in his face. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, so then comes a moment here where we cut away and we go back to Moriarty, and Duncan Ross says the business about the Red-Headed League is concluded most satisfactorily and all that.
Right.
And then we see something here that I think is unique in the entire Granada series, which is Moriarty opens up a map of Paris, which has nothing to do with this episode. So it obviously has to do with the next episode, The Final Problem, and he's planning ahead and, you know, foreshadowing into the next story.
Right.
But as far as I know, that's the only instance in this entire series where something spans, you know, other than maybe, you know, the empty house trailing on, you know, The Final Problem. Those two kind of interact. But
they interact, but it doesn't foreshadow.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I think you might be right.
It's a great thing that they did. Obviously not canonical. It's not in the story that way.
Well, Moriarty's not even in this story.
Right, exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But, you know, it kind of like dips your toe in this what if kind of thing, because I think most fans would argue that this was a great, brilliant touch, adding Moriarty in here.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's, you're treading on thin ice in a sense, because the temptation must have been there to kind of do more of this.
Right.
Because I think dramatically it's quite impressive. It's quite amazing. But I guess I'm happy they didn't. But I wonder what if, you know what I mean?
No, I think it was a good amount of restraint.
Yeah.
Moriarty's always the one people focus on.
Yeah.
You know, obviously with the new one, that's the case. So I think it gives you just that little bit of extra. So he pops up in a couple of episodes.
Right.
And then he just feels a little bit more grand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a good touch.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a note about a different map. When Moriarty is looking at the map of Saxe-Coburg Street,
right,
somebody thought it was important to include a key for the map.
Yeah.
A color-coded key to point where the pawn shop is and where the bank is.
Yeah.
Apparently for Moriarty's benefit. I don't know. But then by contrast, Watson's map, he thought it was important to include a vegetarian restaurant location.
Yeah, and they apparently were fond of that vegetarian restaurant because they mentioned it multiple times.
Yeah, no, it's just a fun touch, you know, just what's important to each side.
Sure, and I always just kind of wondered too, like, why is Watson even drawing this map? Because as soon as he finishes it, they rush out the door.
Yeah.
So what good did it do? I mean, maybe he was just brushing up on his cartography skills. I don't know.
Maybe Holmes was doing something and Watson was just doing something to be busy.
Sure.
So the next time we see Holmes, we get two quite iconic turns of phrase in just one sentence. When Watson asks him, "What are you going to do?" And he stops and he says, "To smoke. It is quite a three-pipe problem."
Right.
You know, and I mean, he also says, "I ask you not to talk to me for 50 minutes," which is pretty arbitrary, but
yeah,
just a nice moment. And then he's still folded up in his chair, daintily holding the little black clay pipe.
Right.
Just I thought it was a great image and a great performance and great lines.
No, yeah, definitely. It's I hate using the word iconic, but it's one of the most memorable lines in the canon and also the most memorable images, which I kind of have a little bit of a nitpick here because I don't know, I feel like when they captured that image of him with his knees curled up, part of me wanted them to get it exactly like the drawing. You know what I mean? Like there was a moment when they were in the train car and the drawings from Silver Blaze. I think we got the image in the show in a different episode, but it was like, you know, they really, really recreated that moment where Holmes and Watson are sitting across from each other and it looks just like the Sidney Paget illustration.
Yeah.
And here I feel like they're just too close on him, you know, like they're really close on him. And I just wanted it to be like they stepped back and they really took a moment to widen the shot out and light the scene. And instead, they kind of circle around him in a close-up moment. And it's not bad. It's definitely not bad. It's definitely good. But I don't know. Part of me felt like it was a missed opportunity to just get like an iconic moment captured there again.
But I wonder if this was just another one of those decisions they had to make. You know, when you were talking about Holmes's face in the earlier scene when he realizes it's John Clay. We're kind of medium shot to wide shot on that one.
Right.
And I think if we were in his face, maybe it would have been too explicit.
Yeah.
But I think in this one, maybe it was called for that we were doing this push into his face because it's more contemplative and...
Oh, yeah, yeah. Dramatically, it's totally the right choice. You know, I just, artistically, I wish they would have just given us both.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like you get it, though. I mean, like,
yeah.
In my mind, I see him just completely folded up into this chair.
Yeah.
You know, whether or not it was a little bit wider, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of Holmes' pipe here, you mentioned the pipe, and I have a note because this is a really weird one for me because I watched it, I paused it, I made a big long note about the pipe, and then I unpaused it, watched a little bit more, and then the camera turned, and I wasn't sure of my note anymore, but I felt like it was worth sharing anyway because it has to do with the pipes, and we're all about the minutia, so
sure.
So here we go. My original note was, so it's a clay pipe that he's smoking, which they were faithful to the story on. And you can tell it's a clay by the way he holds it from that dewdrop, which is the little peg under the bowl, which it's there because the clay pipes get very hot. And it's strange, but here's why. This pipe is different than the last clay pipe we saw him use. Clay pipes, usually they're white, though they do make them in black. They're usually white, and then they become black and oily as the moisture from the tobacco and the ash seeps into the clay. They're not filtered pipes, but in a sense, the clay itself almost acts like a filter, drawing that stuff out. And so that's what makes the pipe splotchy. And when they show this pipe from the side the first time, it's completely black.
Right.
And while they do make them out of black clay, they've always described this as a black and oily pipe. I got the sense that it was that way because he smoked it so much and made it so black and oily when he's in a disputatious mood. But when I saw that it was jet black, it kind of threw me because I was like, well, he would have to smoke this pipe, you know, like for a very, very long time to get it to be uniformly, completely jet black all around.
Sure.
Which is what it seemed to be. And again, looking back on it now, maybe it was a case of the lighting in the room. It could have been a number of things that made it look that black.
Or he just had a different pipe.
Sure, it could have been a different clay pipe, totally. But when the camera turned to the side and went around him a little bit, you could see the other side of the pipe, and there was what appeared to be a little more splotchiness to it. But I just got to say, it kind of threw me because, dang, it was black.
Yeah. I do remember looking at this scene and thinking, you know, that's a pretty handsome-looking pipe. And then, I did go, that must be clay. And I just kind of didn't think anything else of it.
Yeah.
You know, I assume it either just came in black or...
Well, usually, and I don't know if we've said this before, but usually clay pipes were communal pipes that were shared at a pub or whatever, and you would get one and have a very long stem on it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, you'd smoke with it, and then you'd leave it at the pub, and the next guy would come in, break off the tip because it was clay.
Right.
He would smoke with it, and so on and so forth, and they'd get really, really, really short, and then eventually you'd have a really tiny, short clay pipe, which is actually a little bit closer, I think, to the last one we saw. The last one we saw wasn't nearly this long. So it's almost certainly a different pipe, but...
social distancing.
Right, different time.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I found it interesting.
So there was a note in the Baron Gould book about these 3 gilt balls. Did you have a note about that in yours?
I do have a note, yeah.
Well, watching it originally, there's a shot with really oddly prominent balls hanging
right, in the foreground.
In the foreground, you know, large with like hanging from chains.
Yeah.
And it never really felt weird to me. I didn't understand what it was, but now I know that it's the symbol of a pawn shop.
Right.
And again, I kind of thought it was just a neat detail that the show went to include that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, I'm right there with you because I never knew that, and I never noticed it in the show.
Yeah,
and I never even noticed it in that foreground shot.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It just felt like something busy in the foreground, and it was a high shot. But now that I know that it's there, it's impossible not to see it because it's these 3 giant brass, spheres hanging there.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like slightly embarrassed to say this because, I'm such a super fan of the show as you are, but there are actually quite a few things in this one I just never noticed until really these last few viewings of it. And one of them is when Holmes hits the pavement with his stick. I never noticed that he did that in the wide. I always assumed that he just did it when he walked up to John Clay.
Yeah.
And that it was just really subtle. But if you watch the episode very carefully, and frankly, like editing the audio for the other part of the show, listening to it, you can see that he does, in fact, hit the pavement very prominently in the wide shot with his stick, and there's actually a corresponding sound effect, which actually doesn't appear to be in sync with the hitting of the stick on the pavement, but I don't know. It's just something I knew it was there, but I kind of never exactly knew exactly where it was happening before.
Yeah, I've always just kind of accepted that he did it.
Yeah.
Even when I didn't notice it, there was one time, not when we were like researching this episode, but like one time I was going, okay, did he actually smack it? So I ran it back a few times and I kept running it back, but it never went far enough. Like I kept going back to like when he's looking at his knees, thinking maybe he did it then, and then eventually I ran it back further, and then it's in the wide, and it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting,
right?
But speaking of the sync, though, going back to kind of the ADR conversation, another word for ADR or dubbing is actually called looping, because they would just loop the tape, and then they would do either sound effects, Foley, or ADR that way. So like you would just watch it until you got it right, until you got the timing right.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's possible when they were doing the Foley for this scene, they did a smack because maybe like us, they didn't know where the hell it happened, so they just put one in.
Yeah, well, I've actually been watching bonus features from other shows from this time, and editors back then, they had a little tiny 8x8 monitor to watch these things on. And considering that I never noticed Holmes doing that until I watched it on a 60-inch TV or whatever, I can only imagine that those guys are looking at that thing going, where is he hitting the floor?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just put one in.
Yeah.
I think there might be two smacks in there, but one of them definitely doesn't match, but still, it's there.
Yeah, yeah. The more prominent one is off for sure. But at least they did it, and honestly, I'm glad you didn't notice it either, because now I don't feel so terrible about not noticing it before.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, one thing about sync, the scene with Sarasate playing violin, the funny note that I made was I thought it was funny that the actor playing him seemed surprised by his own playing at times.
Yeah.
It's like, this is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But I will say, I was actually pretty impressed by the sync. If it wasn't really him playing, I would be surprised.
Yeah.
I feel like they were actually recording that performance, and he did it.
Yeah.
There are some close-ups where you don't see his fingers, but when you see his fingers, he's actually doing it, which I thought was impressive.
Yeah.
Because I've actually just been recommending a movie that you and I both really like, which is The Commitments, to people. And one of the most clever things about that movie is that they record the actors are actually the band.
Right.
And they actually record them playing live with multiple cameras. So when you're seeing the movie, you're hearing the guy's voice. That's the real performance.
Right.
Which I think makes it much more genuine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, that guy is a concert violinist. His name is Bruce Dukov. And he actually has quite a list of IMDb credits, but as a member of the orchestra, he only actually has a few on-screen credits, but yeah.
Speaking of on-screen credits, again, just kudos to the makeup and research department for the series, because he looks just like a picture I saw of Sarasate online.
Yeah.
Same big bushy mustache and unkempt hair. It's great.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
There's a YouTube channel called Two Set Violin, and it's these two guys who review mainly classical things, but with a funny twist. And they always comment on how accurate actors doing violin is. And I think this would pass the test.
Yeah.
Not positive Jeremy Brett would,
right.
But I think this guy would.
You should send them the clip, and maybe they'll respond and tell you what they think.
That would be funny, actually. Maybe I should do that, because then we can play their segment on the show or something. That'd be funny.
Yeah, should do that.
We'll see.
Well, before we move away from Saxe-Coburg Street, I got to say, when I was reading the story, which I did first, I was wondering when I watched the episode if I was going to see the street sign for Saxe-Coburg Street. You know how they have like the Baker Street sign up on the building and stuff?
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, they didn't let me down. It was there, the sign. But then I started thinking, you know how at the Sherlock Holmes Museum, you can buy replica street signs that say Baker Street?
Yes.
You know,
I have one.
You know, that you can put a... Why wouldn't they make a Saxe-Coburg one? That would be... I feel like that would be a top seller.
This comes back to a conversation we have, and we've had on the show, I think, which is there are so many props they could have. I have a huge list on my phone of things we could do.
I feel like eventually we're going to have time to do that. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but...
I don't know how we don't have time now, but for some reason we just don't.
I know. It's amazing how busy we've been staying in spite of everything, but... Well, we'll come back to that. We'll add it to the list.
I'm actually adding to the list right now. I don't know if you can hear my fingers typing.
Nice.
So back to Baker Street for a second.
Yeah.
When they're loading up to go and they're getting all their gear ready, I think I'm right in saying this is the first appearance of the hunting crop, the riding crop.
Yeah.
I actually looked them up at one point because I just thought it was an interesting thing and cool that they actually use it in the show. You know, Holmes actually gets to wield it in this episode.
Right. Yeah.
And Gray Homburg is back at it. And I made a note about the turned up collar on his, I guess it's a pea coat.
Yeah.
Black pea coat with a gray Homburg. It's like, thought that was a pretty good look.
Sure.
If, you know, quite modern. But the scene where he's like perched up against the wall at the bank, you know, it was a good look.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, there was a note in the first part of the show because Jeremy Brett around this time started working with their costume designer to really try to match the Paget illustrations a little bit better, but they were struggling because Jeremy Brett is, in his own words, a fairly big guy, and you know he's just got a large skeleton, and so they were having a hard time getting him to look thin, as you know, an artificially drawn human does in the Sidney Paget illustrations, and so they did a lot of things to kind of trick the camera into making him look thinner than he actually was. But I think it definitely works well, especially in these first couple of seasons, you know, before he has his problems. But no, I think it's a good look. Speaking of him leaning up against the vault wall, John Clay emerges finally, and he's disarmed by the riding crop.
Which, let me just say, you should go back and watch that shot, because that's he really smacks that gun.
Really?
He draws the gun on him, and then Brett, smacks the gun out of his hand.
Yeah.
Like, I remember thinking, one, you could hurt the actor, but two, you might hurt that riding crop.
Right. Well, again, I'll be nitpicking here for a moment, but I feel like one of my questionable notes was, of all the details that they pay attention to in this show, I was a little disappointed when they did a close-up on John Clay, and you could see the acid splash, but it doesn't appear as though his ears are pierced.
I didn't notice that.
I'm pretty sure they weren't. I mean, I guess if they put like a dot there and it was just so small you couldn't see it, but I mean...
Yeah, I think my vision was obscured by a rare miss from the makeup department.
Oh yeah? What's that?
I thought that the dirt and grime on his face was just too nice. It's like everything was at like right angles to each other. And they're just straight lines. I just thought, I don't know why. I mean, it's a hell of a nitpick, but...
Yeah, I mean, honestly, though, that's on my list of bad, which we'll come back to, I guess. But my note was actually the makeup, if you want to call it that, the dirt on his trousers.
Yeah.
I just felt like if somebody was really digging in the dirt all day, they wouldn't just have two uniformly circular splotches on their knees, their pants would have been...
Well, you never know how rushed they were,
Yeah, exactly. But let's get back to Tim McInerney, the guy who plays John Clay, because I'm going to admit, I never really thought much of him until these most recent viewings, but watching over the last few weeks, I kind of feel like I've developed an appreciation for him. I mean, he has very little screen time, really, when you think about it, but he does do a lot with the time he has. I feel like one of my negative comments would be that he should have been given a little bit more screen time, because once he transforms in the end, it's actually pretty good to see him as a snobby aristocrat.
Yeah.
But we only get like 2 sentences before he's carted off. It just feels like it'd be nice if there was more.
I think it was a really good performance. Thinking back through the episode, it starts out and he's just kind of a normal dude working in a pawn shop and reading the newspaper. He takes Jabez to the Redheaded League, and he's just kind of a normal guy. And like, if you look in the hallway when they said the vacancy's filled, he's just laughing. You know what I mean? Like he just thinks it's hilarious.
Yeah.
Then in this scene, he just transforms into, the word I would use is, and I think it's the correct word, smarmy.
Yeah.
And then his little bow at the end, I thought was a nice touch on the whole thing.
Oh yeah, no, it was great.
One other little interesting note about this scene, Archie, I think is his name.
Yeah.
The guy that's in the tunnel with him. He's actually throughout the whole episode, he kind of pops up.
Yeah.
And I didn't notice, I didn't recognize him because it's almost unnecessary.
Right.
You know, he's in the very first shot, I think, of the whole show.
Yeah, he's the one casing.
Yeah, around the bank.
Yeah.
And then later on, he comes into the pawn shop and talks to John Clay.
It's interesting because I feel like, again, it's one of those things where the show rewards upon multiple views, but it's like, I feel like that actor doesn't have quite as memorable a face as some of the others. And so, you know, there's just so many people to keep track of. I kind of never really realized it was him until very recently at the beginning. And I don't think I ever noticed him in the pawn shop. But
that's, I think, was one of the great things about the show and about the producers, that they thought that detail was important enough to basically give a guy a job for a few days to come out to do that. And it is effectively completely unnecessary, you know, because we didn't notice that for a while.
Yeah.
But it's there. It's a detail that you can go back and look at.
Yeah. It's like the page in The Resident Patient. It's like
right.
All those little details, they help.
Somebody was on set going, no, guys, we're doing this.
Well, speaking of details that they didn't get right, Athelney Jones, or Athelney Jones, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Stephen Fry, I believe, in his stories pronounces it Athelney, and then Jeremy Brett in the show says Athelney. I don't know if there's a Sherlockian out there who has a definitive answer. Feel free to write in.
Yeah,
I was going to send Stephen Fry a note and ask him to clarify, but I didn't want to bug him with that kind of minutia. But regardless of the pronunciation, the thing is, and the guy is a great actor, the guy who plays him, he does a good job. I really like him in this. But he appears in another episode, which I don't think most listeners would possibly have caught this unless you're really, really paying attention, because he does not appear again in The Sign of Four, where the same character appears. They cast another actor to play him in The Sign of Four because they thought they had made a mistake with the name and all this other stuff. But it seems as though they threw him a bone, this actor, because he appears in one other episode, which is The Dying Detective. And he's barely in it. It's like they went, we need a detective to stand in the shadows for 2 seconds and arrest a guy. It's the part where Jeremy Brett stands up and, you know, reveals that he wasn't poisoned, it was all a trick, and the cops are waiting in the next room, and he plays Inspector Morton. He comes in for 1 second and arrests the guy and leaves. So it's almost not...
Blink and you miss it.
Yeah, exactly. Blink and you miss it. But sad in a way, because by that point in the series, it seems like they had lost some of their verve to stay with the continuity, because, you know, they're casting people in more than one role at that point and that kind of a thing. And I know Michael Cox was not happy about that when it happened, but yeah, just kind of interesting. He's one of the only people who appears more than once as different characters.
Yeah. So I made a note that I'm not sure is real or true, but the more I think about it, the more I think it is, and I'll explain. The scene where Moriarty crumbles up the paper.
Yeah.
We're close up on his hands and his fingernails again.
Right.
If you're watching, it's brief, but he crumbles up, like his hand is on the desk, and then there's scratches in the desk.
Oh, yeah.
And I wondered if that was, I assume it is meant to be that he crumbled his hand so hard that he, you know, chipped the paint out of the desk.
Yeah, that's what I always assumed. Yeah, but yeah. I love that touch. Yeah, I thought it was good.
It's a good trick. It's a trick shot, you know what I mean? But it's just an interesting little touch again.
Another question mark I have about Moriarty, he says in this episode, this is the third time that he's been incommoded by Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
In the stories, I'm pretty sure there's only one other instance where Moriarty's involved, which is the Valley of Fear, which is, it takes place earlier, So even if we count that one, obviously that one's not in the Granada series, but if we count that one as 1 and the Red-Headed League as 2, then I wonder what the third one is, the third time he's been incommoded by Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I don't know if there are Sherlockian commentators out there who have speculated on which cases Moriarty may have been involved in.
Oh, there must be.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
Or it's just a fun touch.
Yeah, it could be anything, you know. But I mean, I'm wondering of the ones that it's a weird question because of the ones that were filmed by the Granada series up to this point,
right?
They're not in order. Some of them come after Moriarty was dead or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like you could almost whittle it down to a few and figure out which ones it may or may not have been. You know, obviously it wasn't the scandal in Bohemia.
Yeah, maybe it's just another sort of Doyleism.
Yeah. I just wonder if there's any thought behind it in the Granada series, but I couldn't find any. So it's an unsolved mystery.
I made a note about Jabez, how he just keeps making out in this episode, because you know they trash his place in a really fantastic fashion, and then you know Watson comes and gives him 50 sovereigns from the bank for his trouble.
Sure.
But then I started thinking about it. He got an assistant at half wages.
Right.
And then he went and got paid from the league and paid from the pawn shop, and then 50 sovereigns at the end for a bunch of crap he never sold. So he just keeps making out.
He did all right.
And not learning a lesson.
That's true. But he was the victim. Somebody's going to have to fill in that tunnel and under his pawn shop.
Well, he'll probably hire someone at half wages to do it.
Probably so. I had a note written down here to translate the French that Jeremy Brett speaks at the end from Gustave Flaubert, but he actually says it wrong, which is interesting. I don't know. What he says is almost still translating into basically the same thing, but what he should have said was l'homme c'est rien, l'œuvre c'est tout, which is the man is nothing, the work is everything. But he kind of jumbles it a little bit. I don't know if he gets his words mixed up or what, but he says it a little bit wrong, which I was kind of surprised that they kept, but I think it translates close enough, so I think they probably were fine with it.
Yeah.
But my only other note is that there's no Paget illustrations at the end of this one.
Yeah.
And we also didn't have them in The Resident Patient. And I'm pretty sure we don't get them in The Final Problem.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if they ever come back. I can't remember. Do the Paget illustrations come back in the closing credits? I can't remember.
Now you're making my brain strain.
I know.
I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, well, we'll find out pretty soon.
But as a transition here from the episode to the story, one of the last lines in the last scene when, you know, Holmes is explaining things to Watson, he says, had there been a woman in the house, I would have suspected some vulgar intrigue, you know, regarding Clay.
Right.
In the story, there was a woman in the house.
Yeah.
And further, this is just something maybe I didn't understand about that time in England, but they lived in the pawn shop, above the pawn shop.
Yeah.
And so that makes things, you know, much more precarious in one way, but also they didn't explain how they got Jabez out of the house the night of the bank robbery. In the episode,
right,
they just say, you know, he suggested I go stay with my cousin or whatever it was.
Right.
In the story, there's no mention of that.
Well, there is a theory about that, which I feel like we'll get to as we move into the books.
All right.
You might know that's the theory I'm about to bring up, but let's save it till we get there. So speaking of the stories, this one was first published in the Strand in August of 1891. It's the second of the short stories written, so it hadn't yet made its way into the American papers, like Collier's and Harper's and stuff, so it was never there. It was only in the Strand. In the book, Jabez Wilson is also a Freemason, which is part of the deduction that Holmes does at the beginning when he's talking about the fish and the chain and everything. But they dropped that part from the show. Not really sure why, maybe just for time.
You know, not to just always rip on the Baring Gould book, but there was a big to-do about the coin on his watch chain, on Jabez's watch chain.
Yeah.
The line from the story is that he was wearing a, quote, square pierced bit of metal.
Yeah.
And the book posits that maybe it was a square piece of metal that had a hole in the middle. And to me, I was thinking, would it be more likely that Watson would remark on a square piece of metal with a hole in it, or with a round coin with a square hole?
Yeah.
But then, and I went back and read it a few times, and there's no comma. They didn't say square, comma, pierced bit of metal. It was a square pierced bit of metal. You know, like how would it not be a coin?
Right.
I just thought that was a really weird thing to nitpick over. Like, they all said it was a coin.
Well, people have had 100 years to find things to nitpick in these stories.
I guess. We're nitpicking the dirt on people's faces, so
I know.
Maybe we're as guilty.
Well, speaking of nitpicks, in the Klinger book, as you mentioned at one point earlier, they broke it down of how many words per minute Jabez Wilson would have to have written.
Oh, yeah.
In order to transcribe the Encyclopedia Britannica and the amount of time that he did spend on it.
Yeah.
He'd have to be able to write 557.25 words per minute. So,
I mean, if he didn't have to dip his pen, maybe.
Sure. I mean, the line in the Klinger book says, "a phenomenon!" exclamation point.
That's pretty good.
But along those lines, if Holmes really did smoke 3 pipes of shag tobacco in 50 minutes,
yeah,
that would be another phenomenon.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little clay pipe.
According to R.D. Sherbrooke Walker in Holmes, Watson, and Tobacco, he says, "It was not a feat. It was a monstrous abuse of the membrane of the nose and throat."
Interesting.
So.
But, you know, maybe he's just a pro.
He's a professional smoker for sure. Speaking of John Clay, in the story, he shouts, "Jump, Archie, jump. I'll swing for it." In the show, they cut out the end of that line, obviously, but there is speculation among Sherlockians whether he meant that he would swing down into the hole,
right,
or literally like swing for it as in be hanged for the crime. Those who go down that rabbit hole speculate that since we don't actually meet Jabez Wilson again in the story, that Clay had actually murdered him by that point, and that he knew he would be executed for it. So, I mean, it's kind of an awkward thing for him to shout out.
That's a really awkward thing to shout out.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's like you're admitting that there's been a murder somewhere.
See, I tend to vote for belief in the prior explanation, but...
Yeah, but I don't know that that all tracks for me still, because there is a line, I'm going to read from the story. He says, "Never was such a fellow for photography, snapping away with his camera when he ought to be improving his mind, and then diving into the cellar like a rabbit to develop his pictures. That is his main fault, but on the whole he's a good worker. There's no vice in him." Holmes says, "He's still with you, I presume?" He says, "Yes, sir. He and a girl of 14 who does a bit of simple cooking, keeps the place clean. That's all I have in the house, for I am a widower and never had any family. We live very quietly, sir, the 3 of us, and we keep the roof over our heads, pay our debts, if we do nothing more." So to think that he was digging a tunnel while they were running a pawn shop, 8 to 5,
yeah,
that makes sense. But the fact that they live together above the pawn shop,
yeah,
he could be down there all night doing stuff.
Sure.
But I don't know. I always think of Occam's razor when I read these notes.
Sure.
Because would somebody who's supposedly the 3rd most dangerous, smartest person in London just go, "Hey, I murdered that guy, I'll swing for it," in front of all the police?
Yeah.
Or the fact that they were digging a tunnel underground up into a bank vault, would he just go, "You jump and I'll swing for it"? I think it makes way more sense.
It's true, except there are so many little things that, again, fall into the Conan Doyleisms category because, I mean, for one thing, why dissolve the league? Because they basically have Jabez Wilson on the hook, and then right as they're about to rob the bank, they send him home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, why would you do that? Like,
that to me is a Doyleism in that if they didn't, they would rob the bank and then the story would be over and then Holmes would have never been involved.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, why do they make a movie about these extraordinary people where extraordinary things happen to them? It's like, well, if they didn't happen, there wouldn't be a reason to make a movie about them.
Sure. Well, here's one thing I will tell you. As you're reading the Baring Gould, just keep in mind they have some interesting suggestions in there that sometimes strain credulity. And I'll read you just a tiny little paragraph here from the Martin Dakin book, because I don't even remember what it was in response to. That he was breaking apart something from the Baring Gould that he thought was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll just read you the final paragraph. He says, The macabre suggestion made by Mr. Baring Gould that Athelney/Peter Jones was Jack the Ripper, we may pass by with the tolerant smile with which we have learned to greet the more outre flights of fancy of this distinguished and fascinating, but sometimes eccentric scholar.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, didn't he also say Watson was the Jack the Ripper?
Yeah, pretty much, everybody's looking...
Because he's a doctor.
Right, who could be Jack the Ripper?
Well, there was another note, annotation, I should say, that says about you must find your own ink, pens, and blotting paper.
Yeah.
And it says, is it a likely statement that the man who's the manager for the late Ezekiah Hopkins, philanthropist of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA, would a man who paid £4 a week for purely nominal services boggle at pen, ink, and blotting paper? Mr. Thomas L. Sticks asked in concerning the Red-Headed League. Again, Occam's razor maybe? I thought this is just another errand to get Jabez out of the house.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, why would you? Why wouldn't you come with paper?
Yeah.
Other than to occupy him for another half an hour.
Sure.
Every week,
Yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, it does make sense that people would question why the rich guy wouldn't be able to provide paper and pen, but it also makes sense why he wouldn't have it,
Yeah.
I feel like I'll just give you one last book note here. This one, again, is from Martin Dakin. He writes regarding the vexation Watson mentions when he says, then off to violin land where all is sweetness and delicacy and harmony, and there are no red-headed clients to vex us with their conundrums. Dakin says, I've always felt that this was the most uncalled-for remark, since we are so often assured that the conundrums set by Holmes' clients, so far from being a source of vexation, were the breath of life to him, and so intellectually stimulating that when there was a dearth of them, he took to drugs to escape from the monotony.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought it was, again, a silly observation, but...
yeah, I thought the line was just a funny one.
Yeah.
No red-headed clients to vex us.
Exactly. Well, I have one more interesting note. It's not really a book note exactly, but I just thought listeners might find this interesting. Apparently, in March of 1927, just before the final volume of Sherlock Holmes stories was due to be published in book form, the casebook, the Strand introduced a competition to its readers. And what it was readers of the Strand had to write in which stories from the canon they thought were Conan Doyle's favorite top 12 stories. And they got Conan Doyle to provide a list of what his favorite stories were. So that's why we have this list out there of the ones he considers his favorite. And he actually provided an essay, which is out there, you can read it, about why he chose the ones he chose. But the winner of this contest would get £100 and an autographed copy from Conan Doyle. But Conan Doyle wrote, "It is as a little test of the opinion of the public that I inaugurate the small competition announced here. I have drawn up a list of 12 short stories contained in the 4 published volumes, that is, excepting the casebook at the time, which I will consider to be the best, and which I should like to know to what extent my choice agrees with the Strand readers." And then he left the list in a sealed envelope, apparently, with the editors of the Strand, and they didn't open it until they announced the winner. But the Red-Headed League was number 2.
For Doyle?
Yeah, by Doyle, yeah. And so Doyle's list goes Speckled Band, Red-Headed League, The Dancing Men, Final Problem, Scandal in Bohemia, The Empty House, The 5 Orange Pips, The Second Stain, Devil's Foot, Priory School is number 10, Musgrave Ritual, and Reigate Squire. So those are the ones he thought were the best.
Interesting.
Yeah, but now let's talk about our best. Let's talk about the good. Well, why don't we call the list this time the good, the nitpicks, and the Jeremy bits?
All right.
Because there's not really anything bad. I mean, there's nothing bad in this episode. I mean, to me, the good, it just starts with David Burke, He's just great.
Yeah.
As always. I mean, when he wakes up from his nap, the way he just gets up and he looks, crazy, and then he gets his book really quick and goes out the door. It makes me laugh every time.
How about Holmes pointing at Jabez's head when he introduces him to Watson? He says, "This is Mr. Jabez Wilson." He's just like pointing to the top of his head.
Yeah.
Again, just another weird little Brettism.
Yeah, it's interesting to learn also that was a wig that Jabez Wilson was wearing. He does have red hair, but they gave him a wig.
Yeah, that had to be, though. I mean,
it's a weird, comb over wig. It's just,
yeah.
I don't know. It's a funny choice, to be sure. I do like the fact that in the episode, they made it different than the story, because in the story, Spaulding / Clay, he's really obvious. You know, it's from the onset. You get the idea that Holmes is on to him from the very first time he's mentioned at coming at half wages and, you know, that kind of a thing. But I like the way the show kind of didn't just spill it immediately.
Yeah.
You know, they played it closer to the vest. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, taking them in both like back to back, I feel like they both did things differently and well, but, you know, I think they both turned out great. I think the show changed things to make it better for TV.
Yeah.
And I think they were all good choices. Like, this is up there, I think, with one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, to be sure.
One of the things I like that they kept it, what else could be indicated by the right cuff? So very shiny for 5 inches. Just his delivery there.
Yeah.
So very shiny.
I liked Jabez Wilson / Roger Hammond's hand gestures, his little mannerisms.
Yeah.
Especially like when he's like, it's just a treat to watch him when the moment when he's like, in the matter of your feet.
Yeah.
And then he like touches his mutton chop.
Yeah. Well, that's what I meant. Like when I said, you know, he was just plucked.
Yeah.
Straight out of history. It's just, he was perfect for it.
Yeah.
The thing that wasn't in the story, the line, omne ignotum pro magnifico.
Yeah.
You know, and then Watson goes, everything becomes commonplace by explanation. Watson, that is a very loose translation.
Right.
It's always just been a favorite little moment of mine.
It is a good moment, and I feel like it's odd that they even had to add it in a sense, you know, but I guess I understand why they did. I mean, obviously, people aren't speaking Latin, so it's...
Well, and I wondered if it was maybe a little bit of that, you know, bringing some of the comedy back to the show.
Right.
From the story.
Yeah, it works. I like it. I don't know, this could be in all the good categories, Jeremy Brett, David Burke, and everything, but when he's listening to Sarasate, I mean, just that whole sequence there, it really is a unique sequence, again, in this series, because you get Watson's voiceover, the foreshadowing of the final problem, which is coming, you know, and it's just like knowing that it's coming and knowing that episode really well also, and knowing that Watson's going to narrate the death of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just gives you chills when you know it's coming and you feel it coming, and Watson gives you that little extra narration and just the concerned look in his face. I mean, I don't know. It's one of the top moments in the series in my view.
Yeah, and like you say, I think that makes the inclusion of Moriarty in this episode just much more of a brilliant idea on the part of the producers.
Yeah.
Holmes's knee chuckle.
Yeah.
Which again is right out of the book, you know, out of the story.
Yeah.
Holmes chuckled and wriggled in his chair. Just that moment.
One thing that was not in the story, he himself was educated at Eton and Oxford. So Watson, bring the gun.
Yeah, it was odd, but funny.
It's funny. It's especially funny when you know that Jeremy Brett went to those schools.
Yeah, right.
But it was good stuff.
Do try the SETI.
Yeah, there's so many Watson moments. I kind of just lumped them all into one comment, but it's like there is one that's especially funny to me. Watson's face when Holmes says, "You disappoint me, Watson. I never guess." And he's like,
"Yeah,
I shouldn't have said that. I know I shouldn't have said that."
Yeah, I mean, Duncan Ross, when Jabez is telling him how great it is to copy this thing, he's like, "Yes, good morning," and just walks away.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff. Watson fighting back his laughter. I mean, just so many moments. Like I said at the beginning of this thing, it's like there's so many good things and there's so many things to comment on.
Yeah,
it'd be impossible to do it in real time.
Yeah, it really is. And honestly, it's so fun to do. And I'm slightly worried what's going to happen when we get to, let's say, The Dying Detective, which isn't a bad episode, I got to say. I watched that one because I was curious about that detective.
Yeah,
and it's not a bad episode. It certainly isn't. There's certainly worse. And yet, by the time we get to that point in the series, oh man, Jeremy Brett is struggling so bad. It's so painful to watch.
Yeah.
So I'm just happy to be giving these episodes high ratings, and so many great moments we can't even point them all out. So it's
right, exactly.
But let's talk about the bad for just a moment, because there are a couple things in this episode that do kind of bother me, I got to say.
All right.
The first one is that ECU, extreme close-up, on Jabez Wilson's face when he says, well, I thought at first it was something clever, but now it's like, you know the moment I mean? It's like just that one moment feels like bad BBC early 80s filmmaking as opposed to the polished Granada product we've become used to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That shot always bugs me. It's way too close to his face.
Well, maybe they were proud of the makeup.
And that line is just also so, you know, kind of dodgy, and so it's just putting a spotlight right on him in that moment, and it's always bothered me, that little shot.
Yeah.
But
if that's the worst critique, it's not too bad.
I know.
I mean, I'm trying to think of even something bad. I don't think I made very many notes about the bad. Really, the makeup on John Clay at the end.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that jumps out at me, and that's pretty dang minor.
Yeah, we already talked about the audio when the laughing isn't in sync and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the knees and the tunneling. The only other bad note I have, other than I wish there was more John Clay, is in the bank when they get into the basement, into the cellar, into the vault, all the lights are supposed to be out. And yet it's surprisingly bright in there. I mean, it's not just...
But that's just, you know, you got to be able to see the actors.
I know, it's true. But I mean, they could have done it a different way, you know, with harsher lighting and, you know, careful lighting. But I feel like, you know, it would have been way more difficult. So I forgive it. It's just...
I think you kind of have to forgive it.
Yeah, look at it next time you watch it, though, because it's shockingly bright.
It's bright, but it's one of those things, though. I mean, back then, you know... shooting in actual darkness with the cameras they were using for TV production might have been completely impossible.
Yeah.
And the walls were white.
Yeah.
You know, if the walls were like dark red brick or something,
it
might not have been anywhere near as noticeable.
Right.
So I think you can give them a pass a little bit. That's not such a bad thing.
To be sure. Well, let's talk about the Jeremy. We've talked about a lot of it, the leap over the couch.
Yeah.
But, you know, Watson's double take there adds even more to it, so...
Yeah.
It's good.
You know, even just the little things. I made a note about Watson reads, you know, when he's reading the newspaper and he says the Red-Headed League. Holmes, like, smiles and kind of points at him.
Yeah.
Like, go on, you're going to love this.
Right.
You know, and it was just, I don't know, it's just a nice little thing.
Yeah. The fish tattooed above the wrist. The way he says that.
Yeah.
Great line. The moment when Jeremy Brett, Sherlock Holmes, is watching John Clay as he's like dressing down Inspector Jones, and he's just got like these wide eyes, like this guy is a sociopath.
Yeah.
Just another great moment, like perfect Jeremy Brett reaction.
Yeah. And another moment that you reminded me of is when they're in the bank vault. The bank manager and Sherlock, their roles kind of change, and like Sherlock's bossing him around.
Right.
You know, in the vault. And then at the end, he says, you know, I have some small expense, which I will expect the bank to refund. And he smacks him with the riding crop.
Yeah.
You know, just good stuff.
I mean, again, these first episodes are so great. They're so great.
Yeah.
Well, let's come to the vote then. What do you got?
I think it's really hard to not give it just 10.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just give it 10.
All right. That's fair enough. I'm going to admit I had a really hard time coming up with a number for this one. I've been struggling between 9.9 and 10.
Yeah.
It's nearly perfect, but that close-up moment is almost worth knocking it down 1/10 of a point just by itself. But at the end of the day, I just kind of asked myself, like, is this as good as Solitary Cyclist, Dancing Men, Blue Carbuncle? I got to say, I think it is in a different way.
Yeah.
I don't know why I have that urge to ding it the 10th, but I think I'm going to fight that urge and also give it a full 10.
I think there's a DP out there somewhere who just stopped himself from suicide.
Hopefully so. Okay, well, let's throw it over to the audience with some listener telegrams. Hello, Gus and Luke.
Hello.
I just want to thank you for the excellent podcast. I've watched all the Granada Holmes episodes, some of them many times, and I'm astonished and a little humbled at all the details you've noticed that I haven't. One small thing I did notice, as far back as 1985, was in the Norwood Builder, where Holmes misidentifies the animal tooth as a tooth of a great white shark. It is definitely not a great white tooth, or likely any other shark tooth that I know of. It's far more likely a whale's tooth. As you mentioned in the podcast, the murder of the sailor was not in the original story, nor was the shark tooth, I suspect that the writer chose the great white shark's tooth because, largely thanks to Jaws, that is the most famous and notorious shark species that the majority of the audience would likely be familiar with. The problem seems not to be with the writer, but with the props master who acquired a sufficiently impressive animal's tooth without knowing or caring if it was an actual shark's tooth. It sounds like a minor nitpick, and it is, but the Granada series usually got so much right in terms of detail, it becomes all the more annoying when they get things wrong. In this instance, it's doubly annoying because, of course, it makes Holmes himself wrong as well. Thanks again, and keep up the excellent work. Regards, John. Well, thank you, John.
Yeah, I think you're in good company here. We obviously don't mind the minor nitpick.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I read something about that somewhere else. I can't remember where. I didn't include it when I did the notes on that one. It might have been Granada's Greatest Detective. I'm not sure which book. But yeah, good information to know, just in case any of us come across the body of a dead sailor in our own travels.
Or a dead shark.
The next email is from Chris in London, and he writes, Dear Gus and Luke, I would like to pose a question to you. If you could choose 3 of Granada's episodes to get new viewers hooked, what would yours be? For over a decade, I have tried to convince my wife that the Granada series with Brett as Holmes is far more engaging and worthy of us watching than any other past or present detective shows, but despite her agreeing to watch 3 episodes, she is not interested in watching any more. The 3 I tried on her were The Sign of 4, due to multiple stories going on, The Resident Patient, due to the mix of suspense and amazing deductions, and The Second Stain, due to its prominent female character mixed in with the high-level national political stakes. Alas, even these 3 top-notch episodes have not swayed her. She doesn't dislike them, but equally doesn't love them. Could I ask what your theory would be to try and hook a newbie for the series for me to try on her, or shall I just resign myself to the fact that opposites, Bretons versus everyone else, at least attract? Best wishes, and thank you again, Chris. Well, Chris, that's a tough one.
It's a tough one, but I think we have a canned answer for one episode.
Yeah, The Solitary Cyclist is always our number one to get people hooked, and I think it's worked pretty well up to this point.
Yeah. We've at least got a couple people recently hooked on the show who don't even know we have a podcast.
Yeah.
They watched The Solitary Cyclist and went, we need more.
I would say The Dancing Men is also up there. I mean, it also has a strong female. It also, frankly, is a pretty depressing story. You know, it ends pretty badly for everybody.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe that kind of carries with it a bit more of a modern drama feel in that sense.
See, I might even include The Redheaded League in that because you start to get into that weird side of the Holmes things where they are a little quirky and funny. Solitary Cyclist is like, there's somebody following me on my bicycle. What
Right.
can you do about it?
Yeah.
You know, it's not a modern crime drama. It's pretty small in its scope in that way, but it's very Holmesy.
Yeah.
And that's what it does for me is that you get this like distillation of all the Holmesness in one episode. That's why I love it.
It's true. I almost had that one on the list. I also almost had The Blue Carbuncle on my 3, but I was like, in a sense, because of what you just said, how you get all the Holmes, I almost feel like it's too much Holmes, maybe. You know what I mean? Like seeing Jeremy Brett yelling at the guy on the floor. You know, I feel like maybe that's too much to get started with.
Yeah.
My 3rd one that I voted for was The Speckled Band, because, again, strong woman character, but also pretty depressing, frightening, dramatic, dark story.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, if she's not into that kind of thing, then those wouldn't be the right choices. But I feel like those are 3 good ones.
Yeah, I would do Solitary Cyclist, Speckled Band, Redhead League, and maybe you could swap out one of those last 2 for Scandal in Bohemia.
I feel like Scandal in Bohemia, you're either going to like it or not like it. You know what I mean? After the conversations we've had about it, we've received quite a few emails from people going, I'm with you, I don't like the Scandal in Bohemia very much, or I don't know what you're talking about, Scandal in Bohemia is one of the best.
Yeah.
So I feel like that one does split audiences a little bit. I do feel like you might have stumbled by choosing The Sign of 4, because I feel like that one is a little too much for the uninitiated, I think.
I think so too.
And it's not Jeremy Brett at his best. I don't know. It's not his worst either, but
and it's long.
Yeah, it's a long one. It's a long one for sure. Yeah, well, hopefully that helps. I don't know. Hopefully Chris can get her to give it one more try. But I say if she's only going to watch one more, I think Luke and I are in agreement that it should be Solitary Cyclist.
Yeah. It's about a bicycle. Who doesn't like bicycles?
The next email is from Scott. Scott's a friend of ours at the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere podcast. And he wrote to say, the hat Lestrade was wearing in the episode was some variation of the Cambridge by Locke & Co. It's probably more recognized as a hat Churchill wore, or more famously, the Odd Job hat from Goldfinger. So yeah, that's interesting. It's the Cambridge from Locke & Co. He also mentions that they did an episode of their show called Trifles, all about hats last November. And he gave me a link for it. I think it's episode 152.
All right.
But yeah, I need to give that to you, Luke, because I feel like you're probably going to really like that episode.
I'm still after trying to figure out the maker of that brown Homburg.
Oh, right.
I maintain that it's a Knox Superfine Homburg, but I don't know that for sure.
There's so many things from the show that over the years we've tried to figure out who made the prop or the costume piece, or, you know, there's so many things, and it's so hard to find people who know the answers to these things. So it's great to get these notes. There's one more point that he sent over. He said, you might be interested in the manuscript series from the BSI Press. He says, we've taken a number of manuscripts from public and private collections and provide facsimiles of the originals, as well as transcripts and essays. So, you know, if anybody's interested in seeing the original manuscripts of the stories, there is a series of those from BSI Press, BSI being the Baker Street Irregulars.
That's cool.
Society. Yeah,
that's
so
great.
It's pretty neat. I mean, yeah, when time permits.
It'd be good just for research.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for sending that over. It's really great info. Hopefully, in the near future, we're going to be connecting with Scott over at the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere podcast for a conversation. We've been talking about doing it for a while, but we've just been crazy busy, and now there's a world-ending pandemic on, so we'll see what happens, but hopefully we'll be able to connect with those guys soon.
Definitely.
The next note is from Elias, who writes in to say, Dear Luke and Gus, I had a few questions regarding one of the canes Jeremy Brett would frequently use in the show. What kind of cane does he use? Where can I buy one or obtain one like it? If you have any pieces of information whatsoever on it, it's black with a silver hook-like handle, and then they enclosed a few pictures. I don't know, Luke, have you found anything about this cane in your travels or your explorations?
Well, I haven't found the exact cane, but you can look, even just simple as eBay, if you look up ebony and silver walking stick, something similar will come up. Also something similar to what Watson carries will come up. And then really it's just down to waiting for one that looks vaguely like it. There's a lot of them out there with the curved handle, and a lot of times they're animal heads. There's like an elephant trunk. Some of them are like duck or bird necks, you know, that are leaning over. I've seen a couple that are just flowers. I can't really tell what Jeremy's is, but you can find them. If you want a vintage one, it's a few hundred to sometimes a few $1,000s for a good one. But there are people that make reproductions, so you could find one that way.
Yeah.
But they're out there. I did find some interesting things about canes and walking sticks, though. There's different kinds. There are different, like, classes of walking sticks.
Yeah.
They have decorative canes, which is what this would be. They have other ones that are called systems canes, or gadget canes, Fabergé-made canes. But, like, the systems canes, gadget canes are pretty cool because one of them is like a lighter or a compass. There's one it unscrews into all these different sections, and it's cartographer tools. There's like compasses and rulers and levels and all kinds of things. And then again, cane swords and sword sticks and
any gun canes like the one in Hound of the Baskerville?
Yeah, I think I've seen at least one of those. And there's ones that look like Watsons that flip open, and it's got like a picture frame inside.
I wonder if since there are some photos of this one, how expensive it would be to get a custom one made, if there's a cane maker out there who could just replicate it, essentially.
I mean, anything could be done.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get an ebony stick and then just get the handle made, but if you have a friend with a CNC machine, get one made out of aluminum pretty easily.
Yeah.
Or even steel, and then, polish it. It would look pretty nice, I think.
Cool. Friend of the show, Will, writes in to say, Hello again. I hadn't watched the series for quite some time, and hearing the stories in your podcast was like rediscovering an old friend. I have consigned the old standard quality DVDs to the shelf, bought the Blu-rays, dug out the soundtrack, purchased the Stephen Fry audiobooks, and had a mammoth, self-indulgent Holmes/Brett fest. Sounds pretty good to me.
Definitely.
Whilst on holiday in the mid-1990s, I visited the Granada Studio Tour in Manchester. In an area before digital cameras and camera phones, I only took one photograph on the Baker Street set, which shows me sporting some truly dreadful fashion. Whilst in the area, we visited many of the sites used in the filming of the series, and I especially remember walking around Tatton Park and Oakworth Station on the Cayley and Worth Railway, both of which were used in The Final Problem. The station was a double hit for me, as it was also used in another of my childhood favorites, The Railway Children, from 1970. My mundane ramblings lead to a question. An internet search suggests that the Baker Street set was used for other purposes before it was demolished. I wonder if you had any information on this and the final fate of the set. Noting the 6 Napoleon busts mentioned in your podcast, I wonder if anything else from the set or the props department survived or were saved. Very best of luck with Intersect. Hopefully we'll be able to see that over here in the UK sometime very soon. Very best regards, Will. Thanks, Will. To answer your question, I don't know for sure. I know there were some shows that also shared the set from time to time, especially after the fact, because after all the work they did to build that set, they actually ended up having to rent it back once the show stopped filming there full time. This is later on. This is in like the later seasons. But the set was still there, but they didn't actually have full-time access to it. So there definitely were things filmed there. I honestly don't know a single thing off the top of my head, but as we get later into the show, some of that stuff will probably bubble to the surface and we'll find out there were scheduling conflicts with a different show, you know?
I could be making this up, but I seem to remember that Poirot might have shared some sets.
I would be really surprised if that didn't happen, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, we'll see. In terms of props and other things, honestly, other than that Napoleon bust that another listener was generous enough to show us some pictures of, and I think there was one other listener who used to run, I think we read his email sometime back, he ran a Sherlock Holmes museum,
right?
Not the one in London. He had a different one, and there were some props, I believe, from the show there, but that's all closed down now. But I honestly haven't heard much about anything, props from the set. I look every once in a while on eBay and other places in the hope. There was actually an auction, which if you go digging, you can find it because the listing is still out there, even though the auction is done. And it wasn't eBay, it was, an actual like Sotheby's or something like that had Holmes's calabash pipe, and I believe his deerstalker from The Final Problem. They were in like a glass case, and it was in a museum for a while, at a traveling museum, and then I think it was auctioned after that. I'm not totally certain anymore. It's been a while since I saw that photograph, but there is a picture of it out there in a glass case, and it claims to be the original from the series. So, but yeah, very rarely does stuff seem to pop up.
Similarly, though, I seem to remember seeing on a like prop auction site, I'm pretty sure it was Holmes's morning jacket.
Really? Was it a while ago?
Yeah, it was like 5 years ago I saw it. But it was the same kind of thing. I came across it. The auction was complete, but you could still find it.
Yeah.
I think I just put in Jeremy Brett Sherlock props and it came up.
Yeah, cool. We got a note from Michael saying, I concur with the other listener. Start calling ourselves Bretoners or Bretonians. I don't really remember. There's been so many now I can't keep up. I like Bretonians.
I thought it was Bretons at one point.
Yeah, that one's definitely come up quite a few times. There's been quite a few. We'll read one more note. This one is from John in Louisiana. John says, Gus and Luke, just wanted to let you know how much I've been enjoying your podcast. The last few weeks, I've been recuperating from an accident which required surgery on my foot. This has happened at a time where my only access to entertainment is YouTube. Having been a fan of the Sherlock Holmes series with Jeremy Brett, I discovered that most of them seem to be on YouTube at the moment, and that is where I stumbled onto your podcast. Over the last several days, I would watch the episodes chronologically, then listen to you guys, and go back and find some of the details you pointed out that I had missed the first time. I was a latecomer to both the Doyle stories and the Jeremy Brett series. I really wasn't much of a reader until one Christmas at my grandmother's house when I came across a nicely bound Reader's Digest copy of The Return of Sherlock Holmes. The stories seem to spark my interest not only in Doyle, but in reading in general. As for the Brett series, listening to your podcast has already affected me in one way. I am now prepared to say that David Burke is my favorite Watson, although it's only by a whisker over Edward Hardwicke. Actually, for a long time, I don't even think I realized they were two different Watsons. There were certainly physical resemblances between the two, and I guess I assumed that Burke was a younger version of Hardwicke. At any rate, I'll look forward to your next episode, and want to wish you great success with your film Intersect. Trailer looks intriguing. Hopefully I can have an opportunity to see the film at some point. John. Thank you, John. Well, the long-raging debate over David Burke versus Edward Hardwicke.
Are you a Burker or a Wickian?
We get a lot of notes, actually, regarding this, and I feel like we've made it pretty clear that we kind of err on the side of David Burke, but like you said, it's just a whiskers difference, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the Edward Hardwicke ones and watching them, kind of with the focus and dedication that we have been on these so far, because maybe we'll change our mind, maybe Edward Hardwicke will grow on us even more.
Maybe.
But I do think that you're not the only person who didn't realize there were two different actors playing Watson, because we definitely have friends who have said the same thing, that they watched them out of order and, for a while really didn't even realize they were two different actors. So it's completely understandable.
Definitely.
It's an easy distinction to overlook, but I think, you're definitely in good company in that regard.
Did I really do remarkably badly?
Yes. They're both great. Well, the Red-Headed League. What an episode. Just a quick welcome to our new listeners and followers. We are out there on the internet at twitter.com/SherlockPod, and we're always happy to hear from you at contact@SherlockPodcast.com if you'd like to share your thoughts on the show. And please do subscribe on iTunes. Reviews there are also most welcome. A quick shout out to our Patreon subscribers. You guys keep us going, so thank you once again. And if anyone would like to join us there, we do have a growing collection of exclusive content for patrons. So visit us if you like at patreon.com/SherlockPodcast. Well, it's hard to believe, but we're only one episode away from the end of the season. And what a season ender it is. I hope you will join us next time for the final problem. Until then.